Oh my goodness. Ooh, and whistles too. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for joining me. That was for you. But also, one of the cool things, B&H just keeps getting better and better with this education at the event space, and now all of this is streaming live as well. So thank you for all of you who showed up live and in person, and thank you for everybody who's tuning in online. So we're going to talk about Lightroom best practices. I should have called this like Lightroom pet peeves with Tim Gray, or all the things that annoy Tim, or the stupid mistakes that photographers do. So we're going to talk about some of the very common mistakes that photographers make, and basically give you some guidelines, some recommendations on things that you might want to do a little bit differently. I'm hoping that a good many of my tips will be common knowledge to many of you, hopefully, but I'm sure you'll get some good nuggets in there as well. I find that a lot of photographers dove right into Lightroom and proceeded to make a huge mess of their Lightroom catalog. So let us dive right in. So first and foremost, strategize first. In other words, actually think about your workflow before you dive into using Lightroom to manage your photos. Lightroom is a very special application. It's a little bit of a unique application by virtue of the fact that it uses a catalog. We'll talk more about that catalog shortly. But I find that too many photographers jump in and try to learn Lightroom as they go and don't stop and think about their overall organizational structure. They don't think about what their storage situation might look like, or their folder structure might look like, or how they're going to identify their favorite images, or think about what sort of strategy they'll use with keywording. They don't take a moment to stop and think about what they're doing before they start doing it. And so they're learning as they go and making a mess of Lightroom as a result. So take some time to stop and think about your overall strategy, which really is what the whole rest of my presentation today is about, is a strategy for the various things that you'll want to consider in your workflow. So take the time to actually work on understanding what your workflow ought to be, understanding what might make the most sense for you personally, and truly learn Lightroom. It's never too late, even if you've been using Lightroom since the very first version, even if you've been using Lightroom since the public beta. I promise you there are probably some fundamental things that you might have missed along the way. I can't tell you how many times I'm teaching some sort of technique, some sort of feature in Lightroom, and I'll have somebody who says, oh, I never knew about that feature. That's such a great feature, and I never knew it existed. How long has it been there? Is it a brand new feature? No, it's been there for 7 years. And they just didn't know it because they didn't take the time to really dive in and understand Lightroom. And there's essentially, I think, two pieces to that. One is to actually learn the mechanics of Lightroom, in other words, how you perform these various tasks, but also try to make sure that you truly understand how Lightroom is working, how Lightroom is thinking essentially in the background, such as that catalog that can be one of the greatest features in Lightroom. The fact that there's a catalog enables some really nice features, especially when it comes to locating your photos, to being able to work with your photos even if you're not connected to the internet, or if you don't have your hard drive with your photos connected to your computer. You can be working from virtually anywhere. If you have your Lightroom catalog, you've got previews of your images that you can see. There's some wonderful, wonderful advantages there, but there's some risks in terms of you not recognizing what that catalog is doing and what it actually means. So things that you need to be careful about because of that catalog. So make sure that you're taking some time to really understand how Lightroom works and understand what features are available and what features you might want to make use of. When it comes to your workflow, one of the most important things that I can communicate to you when it comes to your overall Lightroom workflow is once you've decided to use Lightroom to manage your photos, it's okay if you decide to use something else. Lightroom works great for me. It works great for a lot of photographers. If it's not the right solution for you, that's fine. But if you do decide to use Lightroom to manage your photos, absolutely everything that you do with your images should start inside of Lightroom. Remember that catalog that I mentioned. If you go do things outside of Lightroom, Lightroom gets very confused. And if Lightroom's confused, you're confused. And so make sure that every task you want to perform starts inside of Lightroom. You want to rename a photo? No problem, but do it inside of Lightroom. Rename a folder, move a photo, move a folder, all sorts of great things that you can do with your images. You want to do those things inside of Lightroom, and that includes using Photoshop. You can combine Lightroom and Photoshop so that you can leverage the power of both to really make the most of your photos. You do not want to just go into Photoshop and go to the File command and choose Open, or use Adobe Bridge to open your file in Photoshop. You want to make sure that you send the photo from Lightroom to Photoshop. Very, very important. And that's just one example. It's a common mistake that I see photographers making, is they're just opening their photos directly inside of Photoshop. Maybe then they're saving out a TIFF or PSD file with lots of layers and fancy things going on, and then none of that work gets represented in Lightroom. That image file doesn't even exist inside of your Lightroom catalog by default, whereas there's a very simple workflow for sending photos from Lightroom to Photoshop. One catalog. This is one of my biggest pet peeves, I would say, when it comes to using Lightroom to manage your photos. Lightroom employs a catalog. The catalog contains information about your pictures. The pictures live somewhere else on an external hard drive perhaps, or in your pictures folder, wherever that location might be. The pictures and the catalog are essentially two separate things. You have your photos, and then you have all of the information about your photos. In my mind, I want a single catalog. I want all of my photos in one place. I hear all sorts of justifications from photographers as to why they think they need more than one catalog. It is exceedingly rare that they convince me that it's a good idea in their particular situation. Generally speaking, in my mind, I want everything in one place, because the last thing I want to try to do when I launch Lightroom is figure out which catalog to open. I'm looking for photos. Which photos? I don't know. But whatever picture I'm looking for, I don't want to first have to figure out which catalog do I open. It's very, very simple for me. When I'm in Lightroom, I'm working with my catalog, the catalog, a single catalog that contains all of my photos. And that's a lot of pictures in my case, because I have a bit of a photography habit. So my catalog right now, my master catalog that contains all of my photos, has just over 340,000 images. 340,000 5-star images. Select all 5 on the keyboard. Control-A on Windows, Command-A on Macintosh, select all your photos, 5-star rating. It's an instant self-esteem boost. Okay, so that part's not true, that they're all 5-star images, but some of them are 4-star. But there are 341,000 and change images in my Lightroom catalog. So when I'm looking for a photo or even a video clip, I just launch Lightroom, because I know everything that I've done photographically is represented there. And so to me, that is just a huge benefit. I always get the question then, what about performance? Will it slow things down? Well, not exactly. This didn't used to be the case, by the way. I think the reason that a lot of photographers got in the habit of creating multiple catalogs is that the very first version of Lightroom, after around about 30,000 images, it became virtually useless. But Adobe did some work to improve that. And so now what I would say is that, I have compared, because believe me, while I tell you that you should only use one catalog, I use lots and lots of catalogs, but only because I have to teach. And so I'll use a separate catalog for teaching that might contain dozens or hundreds of images versus hundreds of thousands of images, and overall performance in Lightroom is the same, with one exception, and that is initially launching Lightroom takes around about a minute extra. Now granted, that's on a laptop, not the most powerful computer in the world, but it's about a minute longer for it to actually populate the list of all of the folders and how many images are in each of those folders. That's it. Once I'm actually operational in Lightroom, the performance is exactly the same. And more importantly, I'm using Lightroom first and foremost to help keep me organized. And if I have multiple catalogs, I'm not very organized, and I don't know which catalog contains which photos. One of the scariest things I heard as it relates to multiple catalogs, photographers would create individual catalogs by calendar year. I barely know what day it is, let alone what year it might be at any given moment. So the notion of having catalogs by year, that means I'll just never find any of my images ever again. So one catalog. And as much as possible, consolidate your storage. So where are we going to put our Lightroom catalog? By default, it goes into the Pictures folder within your operating system on that primary hard drive, your startup disk. I'm perfectly fine with that. That seems like a reasonable location for the catalog. Where do I put my pictures? Well, ideally, one location. One master storage location for the same basic reason, just to simplify my workflow. I don't want to have to stop and think, wait, which hard drive is that particular photo on? If I'm needing to use, or if I'm choosing to use multiple hard drives, is it by date range, and I've got to remember how old the picture was to figure out which hard drive to go to? Or is it based on project name or something? Now I've got to figure out which hard drive to go look at in order to look for my images. And even just inside of Lightroom. So if we take a quick look at Lightroom here, and you can see that over on the left-hand side I have some folders that represent different photos. Well, I don't want to have multiple lists of folders. So my folder display inside of Lightroom actually reflects the folders as they are on the hard drive, which means if I had 2 hard drives or 3 hard drives containing my photos, now I've got 2 or 3 individual lists of folders, each list being alphabetical, and now I've got 2 lists to go searching for a particular folder when I'm looking for it. So to me, it makes perfect sense to try to consolidate all of that storage. Keep in mind, I still use folders. I'm not just putting every single picture in one big, huge folder, because that would be another mess all in and of itself. I still use a folder structure, but all in one place. So ideally, I prefer to use an external hard drive just because it's easy to back up and it's easy to travel with, et cetera, as needed. If you've got enough space on your internal hard drive, well, there's the real reason that I'm using an external hard drive for my photos, because I'm basically never home. I'm pretty much always traveling. And so for me, it makes the most sense to have Lightroom on my laptop computer. And I don't have 6 terabytes of storage inside my laptop computer. And so for me, an external hard drive makes the most sense. But really the most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, is to try to streamline and simplify your workflow. Just have a single storage location for all of your photos, and then use a folder structure to break that up as needed. And then take some time to review the preferences inside of Lightroom. You might be surprised at some of the options that are available there. And so going back into Lightroom here, for example, if I go to the Lightroom menu on the Macintosh version or the Edit menu on the Windows version, I can choose Preferences, and there are a variety of options, and I encourage you, there are new settings, new options that are added to the Preferences dialog from time to time. So whenever you've got a somewhat significant update to Lightroom, especially a major version number, go check out Preferences and see if there's some additional options that you might want to take a look at. Now, I'm not going to go through every single setting that is available here. Some of these, a lot of these are pretty self-explanatory, but you can pick and choose. For example, do you want the import dialog to come up automatically when you insert a media card that contains photos? In theory, yes, because that's convenient. If I insert a card, it means that I want to download the photos from that card. However, sometimes when I quote unquote insert a card, really it's my phone that I've connected to the computer. Lightroom treats this like a camera, sees that there are pictures on it, and therefore tries to bring up the import dialog when I didn't really want it to. I was just plugging in my phone to synchronize it or charge it or what have you. So just one example there, but there are a variety of things you want to look at. External editing, for example, you can pick and choose what file format and what settings you want to use for the image files that are created when you, for example, send a photo from Lightroom to Photoshop. Do you want a TIFF versus a PSD file? Which color space do you want to use, et cetera? So depending on your particular workflow needs, you might have some preferences there. And then same goes for third-party applications, plugins. We can send photos from Lightroom to a variety of other software applications to apply creative effects, for example. And in those situations, you can choose among the file format that you might want to use to save the result, including, for example, a JPEG option. Maybe you need a smaller file size, or maybe your first and foremost concern is image quality, then you might want the TIFF file format. You can choose 16-bit versus 8-bit per channel mode, for example. So take a look at those settings, make sure they make sense for your particular workflow. Also notice that there are some issues related to the overall performance when it comes to Lightroom. There's 2 things here, one of which is new. The Use Graphics Processor checkbox, I call this the troubleshooting checkbox. Generally speaking, I want this checkbox turned on because it will generally improve performance, sometimes very significantly, with certain tasks inside of Lightroom. Also, though, the drivers for display adapters for graphics cards are notoriously buggy, and when there are problems with your card or with the drivers, then that can cause some stability issues in Lightroom. So if Lightroom is crashing on you, there's a very good chance that turning off that checkbox will help solve the problem. There's also, this is a new feature, the develop setting here, use smart previews instead of originals for image editing. In other words, if you build smart previews inside of Lightroom, which are scaled down DNG versions of your original, for example, raw captures, you can have Lightroom use those when they're available to speed up your processing of images in the develop module. And then the changes get applied just during export. It will then take your raw capture and the adjustments you've applied and create a brand new version of the file based on the export. But otherwise, performance in the develop module is going to be improved. So if you've got the hard drive storage space for all those smart previews, then you can enable this option if you build those smart previews to make working in the develop module that much faster. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about Lightroom Mobile. There's some options here, or some information, I should say, about Lightroom Mobile as well. But again, the key thing is to go through and consider which options. And some of these I find photographers didn't even know certain features existed. Then they learn about them and say, oh, that's so wonderful. Because, for example, I might be a photographer who, when I import photos, I have a tendency of walking away from my computer and going and occupying myself with other things, because otherwise I find that I just get impatient. Look, yeah, let's look at that pic. Why is it taking so long to load? Why can't I see the preview yet? Oh, because it's still copying a bunch of images from my card, and so it gets a little bit frustrating. It's easier to walk away. But I want to know the moment it's finished importing, well, I can have Lightroom play a sound whenever it's finished. It seems like a silly little thing. Look, Lightroom can play a sound when an import operation finishes, except if you have a tendency to walk away and let Lightroom work on that import process, then it could be nice. Ding, I'm done, you can get back to work. Or you can ignore the ding and just make a sandwich. All right. And then save metadata. This one, it's a setting that I find a lot of photographers aren't aware of and don't know that the setting is turned off by default. And for me personally, I know partly this is a pet peeve of mine, but I love having this option turned on. So I want, for two reasons, backup and interoperability between other applications. I want to actually have my metadata saved out to my image files, not just into my Lightroom catalog. So we were looking at the preferences dialog and seeing a few of those options that are available. I do encourage you, again, to go look at all of those preferences and see what might make sense in terms of changing some of those. But the settings that relate specifically to your catalog are not found in preferences, because the preferences dialog relates to Lightroom as a whole. The catalog settings dialog relates to your Lightroom catalog, the catalog that is currently open. Now, I know all of you are only using one Lightroom catalog, so you don't need to worry about this. It's kind of just a little tidbit of trivial information. But if you were someone who actually uses multiple catalogs, for example, maybe at home you have your master catalog, but when you're traveling on your laptop, you use a separate traveling catalog. When you get home, you merge the two catalogs together. That makes sense, but you still just have one master catalog. But when you are using a catalog, if you were using multiple catalogs, the catalog settings only relate to the currently open catalog. And so if there's a reason that you have multiple catalogs, just bear in mind you would need to adjust these settings on each of those catalogs. So catalog settings dialog, first off, I get some information about my catalog. How big is it? When was it last backed up? What's its file name? Where is it located? I can back up the catalog, and I can choose the frequency of that backup. I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but monthly, weekly, daily, every single time I exit Lightroom. How often do I actually back up my Lightroom catalog? About once a week, because I'm also backing up with Time Machine like practically every hour, it seems. I've got a variety of backup systems in place. In any event, we can also go to the File Handling tab in Catalog Settings and specify the size of the previews that are being generated by Lightroom. So remember, I mentioned that you can work with your images in Lightroom even if the images are not currently available. So if I keep my photos on an external hard drive, but I disconnect that hard drive, or right now I don't have my external hard drive with me hooked up to the computer, I can still launch Lightroom and I can still see all of my images. I can see all of the metadata about my images. The only real limitation is I can't work in the develop module unless I built those smart previews, and then I can keep working in the develop module as well. So even without my photos actually available to me, I can do a lot of work and I can review images, etc. Well, those images that I'm seeing are really just previews, and I can specify how large those previews should be. So I mentioned that I have a catalog with about 340,000 plus images, and so Lightroom has to build a JPEG preview essentially for all of those images. That's going to consume a reasonable amount of hard drive storage space. I want ideally a preview that's as small as possible, except I want it to be big enough to actually see. I can specify the size, and the choice here would really be based on the resolution of your monitor display. So here at the moment, I'm using a digital projection system here, so I'm running a relatively low resolution. You can see that I'm set to 1280 pixels. I can specify the size of the images, the width of the images, and I just need something that's about the size of my monitor display. So whatever resolution you have set, you don't need anything bigger. You can also choose the quality. These are JPEG images, don't forget, so there is a certain degradation in terms of overall quality. So you can choose high, medium, or low for quality, which obviously has a bearing on the file size, on how much space is being consumed by those previews. Bear in mind, by the way, little tip, little bonus bit of information. You're seeing those JPEG previews in the library module. When you're in the develop module, you're not seeing the JPEG, you're seeing the actual original file processed with your adjustments. So in most cases, presumably, the raw capture combined with the adjustments you've applied in the develop module. That's why it can sometimes take a moment for that preview to refresh when you go into the develop module. You see the little swirling dots that indicate that the preview is being re-rendered. That's because it actually is literally re-rendering a preview within the develop module based on the original capture. And then you can choose how frequently you want to get rid of one-to-one previews. So when you zoom in on an image to a 1-to-1 or 100% or greater zoom setting, Lightroom has to build a full resolution preview of the image. That's obviously a little bit larger file compared to the smaller previews that are created. And you can choose how frequently you want to get rid of those to free up hard drive space. And the idea here is that how often are you going to zoom in on a photo? I almost never have to zoom in on a photo because I already know it's sharp. Why are you laughing? Yeah, when you're first evaluating the photo, checking for noise, checking for chromatic aberrations, checking to make sure which one's sharper, whatever details, that's usually something you're doing once to the photo, and once you know it's your favorite and you've marked it accordingly, you can move on. You don't need to zoom in anymore, so why keep that one-to-one preview around when you're not likely to zoom in any event? So you can specify how frequently, and that just depends on your own personal workflow style. Do you zoom in on your photos on a regular basis just for fun? Then you might want to never get rid of those previews. All right, and then my real favorite setting here relates to metadata. So the real reason that we came into the catalog settings dialog at all was to talk about one or two checkboxes, and one in particular. So first off, automatically write changes into XMP. What's an XMP? I don't know, but it sounds fancy. So automatically write changes. What this really means, a little bit of a misleading checkbox. What this means is, first off, a little bit of information ahead of time. Lightroom, by default, only saves information updates for your photos, star ratings, keywords, adjustment settings, etc. Only puts that information into your Lightroom catalog. Only puts the information into your Lightroom catalog. What this option means is whenever you update a standard piece of metadata, star ratings, keywords, etc., still save that information into the Lightroom catalog, but also save that information into the image file on the hard drive itself, the original image. However, I'm a little paranoid about my original raw captures, so when it comes to a proprietary raw capture please do not update the file itself, but instead create another file, an XML-based file with the same base file name as the original proprietary raw capture, but with a .xmp file name extension. Put the metadata into that file instead. And by doing so, this will ensure that the information about my photos is saved with my photos, in addition to saving that information into the Lightroom catalog itself. But yeah, could I say that again? Yeah. But Adobe decided that that was a little long-winded for a checkbox, and so they decided to write it this way instead. So just automatically save changes. It doesn't actually only relate to XMP files, meaning it doesn't relate only to proprietary raw captures. In the case of other supported file formats, so TIFF, JPEG, the Adobe DNG format, in those cases, the information goes out into the file itself. And for proprietary raw captures, it's in a sidecar file. It's in an XMP file that sits basically right next to it. But it doesn't include everything. So quick caveat to be aware of, not all information can be saved out to the metadata for your image files. And the reason for that is that some of the information in your catalog, there's no field in metadata that is designated for that information because it's a Lightroom-specific feature. So for example, among a handful of other things, pick flags versus reject flags, that's a Lightroom-specific feature. That information is only saved in the catalog, even with this option turned on, which I'll turn on now. Even with that option turned on, that information is not going to be saved out to the files. Pick flags and reject flags. The history of what you've done in the develop module will not be preserved in the XMP sidecar file or in the image file. What you did, the settings, the adjustments still apply to the image. It's just not being saved as a list of history items. Membership in collections. So if you've added photos to collections, the fact that that photo is part of a collection is not included as part of that metadata either. And there's some other virtual copies, handful of other things as well. But just bear in mind that some of the features that are specific to Lightroom, that information only exists in the Lightroom catalog. So you still want to back up your Lightroom catalog, but now you have this little bit of essentially real-time redundancy in that the information about your photos, your star ratings, keywords, and all that standard metadata is being written in real time out to the photos themselves. And so if you're thoughtful about your workflow in Lightroom, you actually can have a situation, as I do, where if I lost my catalog, if I lost every backup of my Lightroom catalog, I would just shrug. No problem. Because all of the data that I care about, my star ratings and keywords and GPS coordinates and all that sort of thing, that's all being saved in real time to my image file. So I could just make a brand new catalog and re-import all of my photos all at one time into that Lightroom catalog, and I have essentially everything, including, by the way, the adjustment settings in the develop module. Even though those settings conceptually are a Lightroom-only feature, that information is saved within that metadata as well. So I've got a real-time backup of all the information that I really care about the most as it relates to my photos. Note, by the way, there's also an option down below here to write date and time changes. So hypothetically speaking, if you changed time zones and forgot to change the time on your camera, I've never done that personally this week. Yeah, this week. But if you change the date and time on the captures, which you can do inside of Lightroom, I forgot to change the time zone on my camera. Now all my pictures have the wrong time associated with them. I can make that change, but that is something that by default inside of Lightroom will only get written out to the catalog. It won't touch the original files. You can turn on this option as long as the option up above is also turned on, that automatically write changes for metadata. As long as both checkboxes are turned on, then when you make changes to the capture time, that too will be written out to the image files themselves, destroying the evidence that you forgot to change the time in the first place. But also, the second reason, so that real-time backup I think is a wonderful, great feature, but also interoperability. If you were to use another application, for example, to view your photos. Now, this is a very dangerous proposition, because if you're using a different software application to browse your photos and not Lightroom, you might be tempted at some point to change a star rating or change some other piece of metadata in that other application, and now Lightroom doesn't know about that change. Well, it sort of does. It just knows that there's a mismatch in metadata. And if you do that enough, you can make a real mess for yourself where your information in Lightroom and your information out on the hard drive has been changed, and now you don't know which is current, and it might be a mixed scenario where you've got a big mess. So remember that other rule about everything in Lightroom. Every single task related to your images starts in Lightroom, but sometimes you might need to use Bridge. Maybe you're using another application in the Adobe Suite and you just quickly bring up Bridge. If you've made a change to your metadata, you assign star ratings in Lightroom, you assign keywords in Lightroom, that information is not visible in Adobe Bridge or in other applications unless you're saving the metadata out to the files themselves. So just as an interop, so that when I'm in Adobe Bridge, I can still see my changes, my keywords, and what have you, other applications will still be able to see all of that standard metadata by virtue of turning on that option. Master the art of importing. This is where most messes in Lightroom get started. Import. Remember I said make sure you understand how Lightroom works. And I said strategize first. Get a strategy. Know where you're storing your photos and know what sort of folder naming structure you're going to use. Have that all figured out before you start using Lightroom. Or the alternative, make a complete mess of your Lightroom catalog and then have hours of fun cleaning it up later. So you want to be consistent, consistently. When we're importing, in this case actually since I've got, I thought it was going to automatically pop up my phone, which I think is connected, but in any event, when you're importing photos, you've got a variety of decisions that you can make. Where do you want to put those photos? What kind of folder structure do you want to use? Do you want to add any metadata to those photos, like copyright and contact information, for example? Do you want every photo you import to default to a 5-star rating, maybe? Could happen. Again, very good for self-esteem, maybe not so good for image management. But the point is that you've got a variety of options available. You can add some keywords during that import process. Those are going to be your least useful keywords ever because you're assigning keywords to every single image that you're importing. So if I make a trip to Italy and I import the photos and I add the keyword Italy, that's not a very helpful keyword because when I search for keyword Italy, lots and lots of pictures show up and I'm trying to narrow things down a little bit. Plus the folder probably has that same word in it, Italy. I could filter by the folder name, for example. But still, I like to add some of those basic keywords. It takes 2 seconds to add keywords during the import process. I can just type them right over here. But I want to be really consistent. I want to be really thoughtful. One of the great things and horrible things about importing in Lightroom is that most of the settings are sticky, meaning whatever settings you establish, most of those settings will still be set that way the next time you come back and import photos. Not everything. The keywords disappear, for example, which seems like a real problem because I'm in Italy for weeks and I'm downloading images along the way. They all need to have the same keywords, or there will be many of them that get the same keywords. So now I've typed in my keywords for Italy, and the next time I import photos, those keywords aren't there. I have to type them all over again. What a horrible inconvenience. You know what's a bigger inconvenience? Getting home from Italy, downloading photos that you've captured in New York City, and having Lightroom remember your Italy keywords and keep assigning Italy keywords to New York photos. So as much as it might be convenient to have it remember, I only want it to remember if it also happens to know where I am, which it doesn't know yet. Actually, it does because it could look at the GPS for the photos. But in any event, it is something you have to add each time, but that's actually a good thing. The numbering, if you rename your photos, the numbering will stay at what it was, so you have to reset that each time. But again, the point is to be familiar with how Lightroom works. We're bringing images into our Lightroom catalog. That is the primary purpose of importing. However, there's a whole lot of other stuff that we can do at the same time, and I'm an advocate for making full use of the import dialog because I can do all these things all at once. So while importing, First of all, yes, I need to essentially tell Lightroom about my photos. Hey, here's some new pictures I took. Can you help me manage them? Is basically what I'm doing, adding those images to the catalog. But as long as I have to do that, I might as well also let Lightroom copy the photos from my digital media card that I took out of the camera and inserted into my computer's card reader, copy those to my photos drive. And as long as it's copying the photos, it might as well copy them to a second hard drive at the same time so that I'm backing up my photos during the import process. And as long as I'm doing all that, I might as well rename my photos and add my copyright and contact information to the metadata for my photos and add some keywords to my photos and define the name of the folder that I'm using to store the photos. Did I miss anything? There's so many things, so many tasks that I can perform as part of that import operation. But I want to be thoughtful about where I'm putting my pictures and how I'm organizing them and what sorts of keywords I'm using, etc. Being careful, for example, to keep in mind that when I add keywords during import, all of the photos that are being imported are getting those same keywords. So during a trip to Italy, Italy certainly could be a good keyword. And Europe might work as a keyword. But could I put Sicily as a keyword? Well, I don't know, because on the day that I went to Sicily, I was also in Puglia, for example. And so I've got two different locations, two different regions that I might have, and they might be split up amongst those images. So I need to be careful that whatever images I'm importing, I'm assigning keywords that relate to all of them. So again, being careful. But again, coming back to that complacency issue, one of the great things here is that it remembers so many of my settings. So for the next import, I've got most of those settings exactly the way I want them. The problem is that I might forget to change things that I need to change. Or I might get a little bit too quick to import the photos. Bring up the dialog, plug in the card, click the import button, and oops, they're going to the wrong folder. That's going to be a mess. So taking a little bit of extra time maybe to just confirm that everything really is set exactly the way you want it. And I feel that I should hasten to add probably never use the by date option. Or if you insist on using the by date option for your folder structure, where you get a new folder for every single day that you capture pictures, and they're organized in a hierarchy based on year, month, and day, if you're going to use that option, you had better be very, very, very careful about where you're downloading your photos to, so that you don't have a year folder inside a month folder, inside a year folder, inside another year folder, inside another year folder. Oh, I've seen it. I never knew that operating systems could nest folders that deep for the mess that some photographers have made by having this option turned on. I don't like the option in the first place, because I don't even know what day of the week it is today, and I certainly don't know the date. So how am I going to remember where my photos were captured in terms of date? For me, personally, that's pretty useless, but it is a setting that can be very dangerous. So if you prefer to organize with a date-based folder structure, be very, very careful and be consistent. So make sure that you're using a very consistent workflow. Take the time, as I mentioned previously, to actually define that workflow, and now make sure that you're using a very similar approach to that. Use star ratings. What about pick flags? No. What about color labels? Maybe. The idea is that we want to identify our favorite images, right? So which images are my favorites? All of them. I love them all equally. So I want to go through and identify, in fact, I've got Croatia here. Here, this one, some of you maybe have seen this photo before, but we'll let you look at it again. I want to identify my favorite photos. That's kind of the whole point, right, is to figure out which ones are your favorites so that you can focus your energy on those. And then you have the decision, how do you make those favorites known? A couple different options in a general category. You could just delete everything else. If it's not a favorite, delete it. I am not cool with that. How do you think I get to 341,000 plus images in my Lightroom catalog? You don't get there by deleting photos. But really, it's just, admittedly, probably, maybe some therapy would help. But really what it boils down to is this fear that I'm going to delete the wrong one. I deleted what I thought was the outtake, but actually that was the one that was in focus, and I kept the picture that was out of focus. I mean that hypothetically, because of course they were all in focus in the first place. But I don't tend to delete photos. I don't like having the chance that I'll delete something that ends up being a treasured memory and now I got rid of it. So I'm gonna keep all of my pictures, but I want to identify my favorites so that when somebody says, hey Tim, do you have any good pictures of Croatia? I don't send them this one by mistake. So you have three basic options. You could work some other tricks. You could use keywords. You could have a keyword called favorite, for example. There's all sorts of possibilities, but when it comes to identifying favorites, Lightroom gives us three basic features that are sort of intended for that purpose. Number one is the pick and reject flags. I don't like pick and reject flags for a few reasons. Number one, that's like a yes-no decision. I'm better with shades of gray, no pun intended. So I don't want to have to say yes or no because there's some maybes in there. Well, it's not my best work, but maybe it would be good as a supplemental image, a secondary image for some purpose to show context or what have you. So the yes and no decision I'm not so crazy about. Also, pick and reject flags. Pick, that I'm okay with. Reject? That seems a bit harsh. Just my less favorite. How's that? No, but the real reason that I don't use pick and reject flags relates to something I mentioned earlier. It is a Lightroom-only feature. No other software on the planet that I know of understands your Lightroom pick flags. If you save your metadata out to the image files, pick flags don't go there. Adobe Bridge wouldn't even know what to do with a pick flag because that feature isn't supported in Adobe Bridge. And so I want to use features as much as possible that have this sort of broad use, that are industry standards, essentially. Pick and reject flags are not on that list, so that's not of interest to me. Color labels, to me, that's more of a supplemental option. I use those to identify images with for some other purpose. For example, it doesn't have any significance why I chose these colors. It was just randomly the thing that happened, that images that are part of a set, I'll identify with a yellow color label. So panoramas and HDRs and things like that. If I know I'm going to create a composite, I just use a yellow color label just because that's the color I started using for that purpose. I use a green color label to mark pictures that I want to share with somebody else. In other words, not every single picture I take is a masterpiece. Most of them, no, not even most. With 341,000, how many are masterpieces? Like maybe 3. And that's only in my opinion, nobody else agrees. But not every single picture is going to be an absolute masterpiece, maybe. So in any event, the color labels are, to me, a little bit less useful. It's mostly for a secondary purpose. And there's no clear inherent meaning. Technically, color labels started out as being a priority field, essentially, in the journalistic world. So red was really important, and purple, meh. We'll get to it later. So you could certainly use color labels, but because there's not as much of an inherent meaning to them, you can still only assign one color label to an image, just like star ratings or pick flags. You can only pick one option. Also, funny enough, if you're an Adobe Bridge user, here's a little setting that we should mention here. If you're an Adobe Bridge user, Adobe Bridge and Lightroom use a different definition for color labels. Let's go take a look. Lightroom, when you add a red color label, it puts the word red in the label field. When you add a yellow color label, it puts the word yellow in the label field. I don't need to finish the rest of these, do I? Pretty obvious. I wonder why they chose that approach, that Lightroom team at Adobe. Well, probably logic. What did the Bridge team decide to call these things? Select, second, approved, review, and to do. I mean, if I say purple, what do you think? To do, right? Yeah, of course. So if you used to use Bridge and now you're using Lightroom, you're going to have a lot of white color labels. Because when the word in metadata isn't on Lightroom's list, it just makes it a white color label. There's a label here, but I don't know what color it's supposed to be because it says select. What kind of sense does that make? or to do. So bear in mind that Lightroom uses color labels the way they should be used and Bridge doesn't, and so there could be a little bit of a mismatch. That's another reason that I'm not so crazy about color labels. I treat them as just kind of a secondary thing. So instead I use star ratings. Easy decision. Gives me that ranking ability. This one is really, really good, and this one's okay. This one's my real favorite, and this one is just usable. And it's a standard metadata value. Any software that enables you to browse your photos supports star ratings. And so you'll be able to see those star ratings essentially everywhere. And then I also take, just for your consideration, a little bit of an unusual approach. I mean, it's only unusual now. Once you and the millions of people who are watching this live streaming version from the B&H Photo event space, once they start spreading the word about this approach, it'll become the standard approach. But for now, it's a little bit of a non-standard approach. First off, I take multiple stages to reviewing my photos. Second off, I try to delay that review process. It's not procrastination, I promise. It's that I'm trying to make sure that I'm being thoughtful and that I'm being consistent and that I'm not letting my emotions get the better of me. So if we treat star ratings as 1 means it's a really, really bad image that you should delete, and 5 means it is amazing, I want to buy that image from you right now, I'm going to write a check, I'm going to leave the amount blank and leave it with you, how many stars would you give to this image? Anything 5 or above means that you do have to give me that blank check. Okay, so I heard 2. He didn't sound sure of himself. It sounded like being generous with that extra star. Like, I'm standing right here, I'm going to give you a bonus star. Just don't take it too personally. Fine. So we'll call that a 1 star. Basically, he's saying I should delete the picture right now, but I'm not going to, because I don't delete my pictures. How many stars would that get the moment I clicked the shutter? Okay, I should explain a little. It's the Adriatic. Look at the clarity of that water. And look at the color, the like aqua blue, turquoisey. It's amazing. There were fish in there. The water was relatively warm. And they've got this ladder here. You can't really tell, so I understand why you didn't give it a 5-star rating right away. It's like a little rocky surface there. You could jump right in. It's about 8 or 10 feet deep, right there by the ladder. You can dive right in. And the water's kind of warm. And it's beautiful. And then you can climb out on the ladder and jump in again. Watch the fish swim around. Oh, I didn't even mention the like tortoise shell pattern on the rocks in the foreground from the light on the ripples of the water. It was like 5 stars easy. Like, does Lightroom go to 6 or 10? Yeah, easily, because that experience, it was just amazing. It was beautiful. This is in Croatia, actually. I had no idea that the coast of Croatia was so beautiful. And it's amazing. And I had a great time. It was wonderful. So it seemed like it was definitely a 5-star experience, just wasn't a 5-star photo. But in that moment, I might have given it a little more stars than it deserved, like about 4 more than it deserved, apparently. So I try to delay. Obviously, yes, I know, sometimes you're on a deadline, sometimes you've got to enter photos in a contest or get them to the magazine so they can put it on the cover right away. I mean, not this one, but some. Why do you think I started my own magazine? Get the cover every month. So I want to try as much as possible. Yes, sometimes I'm in a hurry for whatever reason, but as much as possible, I try to kind of postpone that review process so that I separate the emotions from that process. And then, partly motivated by a desire to be able to work a little bit more quickly, when I review each image, I don't assign anything other. Essentially, I have rules about how many stars I can assign during each pass. The first time I'm going through my images, it's a very simple decision. Remember that yes-no decision I claim to not be so good at? It's a yes or no, does it get 1 star? Because my feeling is 1 star equals bad, then why bother? Why bother assigning a star rating? Why waste that extra time and energy assigning a star rating for an image I'm never going to use? So I go through and review all of my photos, and I assign stars, a star initially, to the photos that I like, that I think are keepers, like this one. You know, I go through and, oh, window, oh, wow, okay, that one I like. Finally, found one. Kind of an interesting, I have a thing for windows and shutters and stuff. So it's one or it's nothing. I either press the number 1 on the keyboard or I press the right arrow to move on. This one, oh wait, there's a dog in it. It gets a star. And sometimes, you know, oh, this one gets a star. Oh wait, that one's actually not crooked, so that one will get a star and I'll go back and remove the star from the previous image, etc. So it's just a simple yes or no. Do I want to assign a star to this image? Is it a keeper? Do I think it has the potential to be one of my favorites? Easy breezy. And because I'm just making that quick decision, yes or no, I can fly through my images really, really quickly. Plus, I took the pictures. I kind of know what I've got in there. I already maybe have a sense of which images I think are going to be my favorites. And so that process goes pretty quickly. Then I try to wait a little bit longer to go back for my second pass. So I might filter the images, for example, so that I can only see my 5-star rated images. So for example, setting a filter here based on a 1-star rating, so I'm only looking at my keepers. And now I'll go back through the images again and decide, am I going to upgrade any of these photos to a 2 or a 3-star rating? 2 stars at that stage means this is one of my favorites from this trip. Definitely cannot wait to get this one onto Instagram and see how many likes I get. It's Tim Gray Photo on Instagram in case you want to go. Just each photo, just tap the heart real quick and easy, and self-esteem boost with every tap. So 2 stars means this easily one of my favorites from this particular trip. And 3 stars means I think this might be one of my best pictures ever. This could be a portfolio image. And so far I haven't had any of those, but one day. You keep at it long enough and I figure by the time I get up to about 500,000 pictures, then I probably will have a 3-star. All right, so 2 stars, one of the best from this trip. 3 stars, possible portfolio contender. When will I know? Well, first we got to post it to Instagram and see how many likes I get. But then I also want to live with the image a little bit. Take it to the develop module and optimize it, see how it's turning out. Maybe make a print. Maybe show it to some other people whose opinions I value, see what they think. Whatever process makes sense for you to kind of figure out, is this really, maybe I was biased because it was the Adriatic, or is it really one of my better images? And it's not until I've kind of lived with the image a little bit, made a print, optimized, whatever process that might be, then I would consider a 4 or a 5-star rating, meaning after living with this picture for a while, it still holds up as one of my favorites. So these are the images, the 4 and the 5-star rated images. Those are the ones when somebody says, so you call yourself a photographer, let's see what you got. That's putting my best foot forward and hoping that they think they're okay. All right, so that's the approach that I use, and I find that is very, very helpful because it lets me work pretty quickly, and it gives me the ability to have that ranking and as much as possible sort of separate out the emotion from that process, just to try to make sure that I'm being as honest with myself as possible and not biased based on, having just swam in those waters. Add keywords. Oh man. Who's with me? Do you just love adding keywords to your photos? How much time do you want to spend adding keywords to your pictures? None. When you're looking for a picture, how much time do you wish you had spent adding keywords to your photos? Like all of your time, because now you're spending all of your time trying to find the picture. There's actually 2 reasons that I prefer to add keywords to my photos. The first, let's see what kind of pictures we got here. Well, actually, we could stick with Croatia here because, what was that place called? More importantly, how do you spell it? And isn't it actually, she's heard these jokes before. She spelled it perfectly. And is it, this is one of my problems, is once I've learned something the wrong way, then I can't remember which way is the right way, so I shouldn't use this picture for that example, because I don't know if it's Opatia or Opatia. And I think it's the latter, but I'm not totally sure. Do you know for a fact? Opatia? All I know is that when I first was talking to someone from Croatia and said that we were in this place, she corrected me, except now I can't remember what I said versus what she corrected it to, but I'm guessing now it's Opatia. And there's a J in there. You know, and I think this is Rovini. Does anybody know for sure? Because if not, I'm claiming it's Rovini, which has a J in there also. I don't know this. I don't know how that spelling works, but it's in there. How do you spell it? I don't know. Let's ask Siri, see if she can figure it out for me. So getting at this reason, 2 reasons for using keywords in your images. I might be, for example, I really should have used names of place. I should have used a place that I remember the name of. Let's go back to Italy. And we can, so here we go. Here's a picture that I know where it was from. This is Bologna. How do you spell Bologna? There's a G in there, right? Yeah, what? So there's 2 reasons for those keywords. Number 1, if you said to me, hey, Tim, got any great pictures of windows? And I would say, yeah, I got one in Bologna that was kind of cool. Really nice light. The colors were pretty strong. I like it. Type Bologna so that I can find the picture. There's the other direction also, though. Wow, Tim, where was that picture taken? Italy. But where? Don't know. Don't remember. Didn't add a keyword. So I'm adding keywords both so that I can find an image, but also so that I can remind myself of where an image was or what the subject. Now, not really where it was, for a reason we'll talk about later, but you think that you're going to remember what piazza was at, or what's the name of that building, or what's the name of this church, or whatever the case might be. What's this body of water, or what do you call those structures in Alberobello, Italy? I don't remember. Truly, I don't remember. Oh, that's right, they're called Truly. See what I did there? Truly, they're called Truly. All right, that's going out of the joke book. So yeah, by using keywords, I can remind myself of what that thing was, but I also can find it when I'm looking for it. So it's tricky in terms of, I don't want to spend any time adding keywords, but I sure do wish my photos had more keywords assigned to them. But I think first and foremost, remember that strategy bit that I talked about at the beginning, is giving some thought to how you should be using keywords. Now, if you're a stock photographer, I'm not sure if that species exists anymore, but if you're a stock photographer, you need to add lots and lots of keywords. Or if you're a journalistic photographer, you need lots and lots of keywords. You're going to spend a lot of time keywording. You have no choice. If you're a nature photographer, maybe you never. If you're a bird photographer, maybe you never add keywords because you already know what all those birds are called anyway. But what about when you're looking for that particular species of bird, or whatever the case might be? So give some thought to what sorts of keywords make sense for you, what sorts of things you might forget, what sort of information you're going to want to know at a later date about a particular photo, and then use that as the basis of assigning keywords to your photos, and try to streamline that process as much as possible. As an example, there is a feature in Lightroom that enables you to add keywords or other metadata really quickly and easily, and that is the painter tool down here on the toolbar. When you're in the grid view in Lightroom, there's a painter tool on the toolbar. So I've hidden my panels just because I want to be able to see more pictures, so Shift-Tab to hide all those panels. If you don't see the toolbar down below the grid view display, first of all, make sure that you're not in the loop view, but rather in the grid view. And if that toolbar is not visible, the letter T on the keyboard is a shortcut key to enable it. And that little spray can, lots of people like to make fun of that spray can, but it actually can be rather helpful for adding keywords and other metadata, especially when you photograph the same subject but out of order. You go on a safari in Africa, for example, and you're going to photograph zebras and elephants and giraffes. So you saw some zebras over here, then some giraffes over there, and then some more zebras over there. So you've got these images that are kind of out of order with keywords that need to be similar to each other. So I'm going to click on that painter tool. I'm going to make sure that my paint option is set to keywords, and I'm going to type in whichever keywords I'd like to add. So for example, Alberobello is the name of the place, and truly is the name of the thing, these structures, houses actually. So I'm adding those keywords. So here is, up at the top right, a picture of truly in Alberobello, so I can click on that image to add those keywords. But it gets better, because it's a spray can. And you know, spray can, you can spray all over stuff. So I can go on, here's a row of images of the same thing, truly in Alberobello. So click, keep my mouse button down, and spray across multiple images. And in fact, down here we've got some more. Click and drag and spray those keywords across multiple images. And I see that little white box around the thumbnail for the photo so that I can see which images have those keywords and which don't. And so I can scroll through and see if there's any other truly in Alberobello. Look, a canola. So I can add those keywords to any of the images that apply. Come back down then and change those keywords to something else, etc. So I try to find ways to streamline my workflow for adding keywords to be as efficient as possible, but I do try to take a little bit of time. Look, the Eiffel Tower. Am I ever going to forget that it's called the Eiffel Tower? Someday, but hopefully not for a long time. But am I ever going to be searching for the Eiffel Tower? Maybe, maybe not, right? I can just go to my Paris folder and filter based on star ratings, and if it's one of my better shots, I'll be able to pick it out of the crowd pretty easily. Am I going to add a keyword to that building of, what's it called, and the pipes are on the outside and it's really colorful, and yes, exactly. I can't pronounce it correctly because my French pronunciation is horrible, but the Pompidou building. I can't do like the Georges with the S like barely there on the tail end. I'm not good at that pronunciation, but it's that building. Number one, can I spell it? Google. So can I spell it? I hope so, but then I might want to know how to spell it later. I can't remember. So for things that are really obvious, then maybe I don't need the keyword so much, but then I need to think about, will I be searching for that subject later? Now pay attention, because I don't mean to this, what I'm doing right now, but I mean just generally in the world in the future, we're going to see image analysis get better and better. There will be a day when keywording will be obsolete. We'll just laugh at it. It'll just seem like so quaint. Really? No, tell me again. People used to keyword their photos. Why would they do that? Because there actually is image analysis. And you've probably already seen inside of Lightroom, there's some image analysis in terms of face recognition, being able to identify that there are people in the photos and that this person and this person are the same person. So if you name one of them, they both get the name kind of a thing. That's pretty cool. Go check out Photoshop Elements 15. Elements. Look at the Elements organizer and take a look at its object recognition capability. I believe this is the trial run and that we'll see it in Lightroom in the not too distant future, I hope. Because inside of the Elements organizer, as of version 15, it will actually analyze your photos and it will assign these essentially virtual keywords, these automatic keywords of sorts, smart tags, for things like the Eiffel Tower and the Statue of Liberty and that it's water and that it's a boat and whatever else it might be. It's amazing. In the meantime, you only really have two options. Either spend some time keywording for the reasons I mentioned, or just convince yourself that that day is coming very soon and image analysis is going to take care of all of it, so I don't need to find anything this week, but as soon as that feature is available in Lightroom, then I'll be able to find those pictures again. But again, I do encourage spending a little bit of time thinking about keywording both to remind yourself of what's in the photo and to enable you to go find that object later. All right, leverage GPS. Since we're at B&H Photo, there's lots of cameras right outside the event space door. You can go buy a brand new camera, and now you've got an even more valid excuse in case you need one. Yes, but I need the GPS coordinates for every photo to be embedded in the metadata for my pictures. You got to say it convincingly. But it's a great excuse, business reason for buying a new camera. Like for example, a smartphone, built-in GPS receiver. All of my photos get tagged automatically. And I don't remember which version number, but on the iPhone, for example, it used to be that you could not have the phone in airplane mode. When airplane mode was enabled, the GPS receiver was disabled, and so no location information. Well, if you're traveling internationally and you want to make sure not to get those excessive data charges, you might keep your phone in airplane mode all the time. Well, now in airplane mode, the GPS receiver is still active, so you get location information on your photos automatically. It's amazing. It's amazing because with a camera that records GPS information, and that's an increasing number of cameras, so smartphones, there's a lot of point-and-shoot cameras, a lot of mirrorless cameras that have GPS built in, and now we're seeing some digital SLRs. 3 or 4 models that I know of that have a GPS receiver built in, and there's even supplemental accessory GPS devices you can get for certain cameras as well. So if your photography involves travel, or if you have any interest in remembering where a picture was taken or being able to figure out what that subject was, GPS can be invaluable. So here, for example, these photos were captured. In this case, I was using a Canon 7D Mark II, which has a built-in GPS receiver. And so if you take a look at these thumbnails, you'll see it looks kind of sort of like a little push pin that you might put on a map. If I click on that push pin, I'm automatically taken to the map module. And in the map module in Lightroom, it is showing me the photo that I clicked on, that little symbol for, that badge. And I can then see exactly where those pictures were captured, what street corner I was on when I captured those particular photos. And so I know, for example, what they're called in this case, because that area is labeled as being the village that contains the Truly. But also, in my metadata, you can see this is an option that you could disable if you wanted to, but I think it's a wonderful option, based on GPS coordinates. So I could actually, in theory, just take these GPS coordinates. If you want to go photograph the Truly, just write down all those numbers. You can plug those into Google Maps, and that'll take you, well, why bother with those numbers? Just remember Alberobello in Italy, in the Puglia region of Italy. So it can actually tell me, based on Google Maps information, based on where that falls on the map, it can tell me exactly where that particular location was. And that is valuable for a variety of reasons. Sometimes people are just curious. Hey, Tim, where'd you take that picture of the windows? It was approximately near Piazza dei Celestini in Bologna, by the best of my recollection of my memory of exactly where I was standing when I clicked that picture. That would be my estimation. Well, Tim, what was the latitude and longitude of, well, it was something like 44 degrees, 29 minutes, 32 seconds north. And then some margin for error here, but maybe somewhere around 11 degrees, 20 minutes, 29 seconds east. Or Bologna. In the Emilia-Romagna region. So I can see that information, I can browse. And this actually is pretty cool for a number of reasons. Number one, sometimes it's just curiosity. Hey, where'd you take that picture? Oh, it was in Bologna. Sometimes you want to go back to photograph that same scene again, because we were in Alberobello with the Truly, and it was, as you probably saw already with those photos, a real dreary, overcast day. Let's go back when it's a nice clear blue sky or some nice puffy cumulus clouds. And sometimes it's, just whether or not I want to go back there, I just want to be able to tell people where it was or show people. where those locations are. Hey, Tim, do you mind sharing the location? Yeah, instead of me explaining where it is, let me just export a JPEG version of the photo and email it to you, and you can just browse it in Lightroom and see exactly what those GPS coordinates are. So there's all sorts of convenient reasons, and the best part is that if you have a camera with a GPS receiver built in, you don't have to think about it. Because yes, indeed, I can add photos to the map if I can remember exactly where a picture was taken, for example. Nope, don't remember. Let's see if we, in theory, some of these photos, okay, yes, this one I can find on the map. This one I can certainly find on the map. So I can go searching on the map and figure out where that location was, and then I can actually literally just drag and drop photos onto the map in order to add those GPS coordinates as well. So, for example, if I can spell Uniontown, there's Uniontown, 195, yes, perfect, perfect. Schley Road, yes. So this picture here was captured from about that location right there. So I can drag this photo and drop it right onto the map to say that's where that picture was taken. And notice here over on the right-hand side, now that I've dragged and dropped the photo onto the map, it can tell me exactly what those GPS coordinates were. If it's a known location, it'll tell me what that location was, etc. So I know a lot of photographers say, well, location information is not that important. Yeah, until you're trying to go back and photograph that same red barn again, or whatever the case might be. It can be really, really helpful. Consider mobile. It's for more than just selfies. So mobile is, I mean, do I say that it's a new thing? It's been around for a while, hasn't it? But it keeps getting better and better and better. So it's emerging now as a much more useful, helpful option. And so, for example, I want to show you just kind of an overview here of some capabilities when it comes to mobile. So I can synchronize. Yes, of course, I can take pictures with this device. And I can figure out my location. I can create GPS track logs. I can play games. I just found out last week with this particular model, I can make phone calls as well. But there is also a version of Lightroom for the mobile device. And so, for example, here I am in the desktop version of Lightroom, and I have some photos that I want to share. So here is a group of photos that I've decided to share. So I need to make a collection first and foremost. So I make a collection that contains the photos that I want to synchronize across my multiple devices. Why would I want to synchronize across multiple devices? For one thing, it's really cool, and it impresses people. But also, sometimes you want to share your photos. So you make a collection of some of your favorite photos or your favorite photos from a particular trip, and then you synchronize them to all of your devices so that you have them on your iPhone, your iPad, your Android device, your web browser. True story. So for example, I've got this collection that I've created. I added some photos that I want to share to that collection. I'm signed in, so this does require the Creative Cloud version of Lightroom, and I've signed in to my Creative Cloud account with my Adobe ID, and I've enabled synchronization. And then I have a collection created here, and over toward the left of that collection, small little icon, not so easy to see on the display there, but it almost looks kind of like a little lightning bolt of sorts, a little double-headed arrow. That means that synchronization has been enabled for that collection. So now, anything that I do with these images will be reflected elsewhere. So just for example, here's my 5 images that I have in this collection that are already synchronized, etc. I'm going to go into the Develop module for one of those images, for example. And just so that we have a real obvious change to the photo, I'm just going to convert it real quickly to black and white without worrying about the adjustments themselves. And then Lightroom will synchronize those adjustments. With any luck, if technology behaves itself for me, using my actually iPhone cellular connection for my internet here, hopefully that will happen quick enough to actually be impressive. If I switch to my web browser and go to lightroom.adobe.com and sign in with my Adobe ID, I can see all of those pictures that are in that Photos to Share group. that collection. And looky there, that picture has been converted to black and white right inside of my web browser. And I can even switch to my phone. So I'm going to switch my display here so that we can take a look at what is on my phone, which happens to be Lightroom Mobile at the moment. First, I'm going to set my phone down carefully, because now I have to unplug a cable and plug it back in. We're good to go on that? Yeah. Perfect. And we switch without dropping the phone. So Lightroom Mobile running on my phone, and you can see, sure enough, there's my photos to share, and the image has been updated to black and white. I can assign star ratings here and apply a variety of adjustments. I can crop and rotate the image and apply presets and apply a handful of adjustments. Not every single adjustment that's available on the desktop yet, but that list of adjustments keeps growing, keeps increasing with each new version of Lightroom Mobile. And so I can go through and share my photos and assign star ratings to my photos, etc., on my mobile device. And once the photos have synchronized, I've got a version of those photos that are on my device. So even when I'm not connected to the internet on that device, I'm still able to see my photos and browse my photos and update my photos. And then all those changes will just synchronize once I get back. So we'll switch back here to the desktop. Alrighty. So once again, all of those changes that I'm making are synchronizing in real time, and so I'm able to work across a variety of devices. So we saw Lightroom obviously on my computer, the desktop version, if you will, of Lightroom. Lightroom on my mobile device with a special mobile version of Lightroom, and Lightroom in my web browser so that I can, from anywhere, at any time, if somebody says, hey, can I see your pictures? Well, yeah, what are the odds that I don't have my phone with me? Pretty slim. But if I didn't, then I could just use any computer that's connected to the internet to sign in to my Adobe ID, my Creative Cloud account, and see all of those photos that I've synchronized. So there's a variety of potential benefits there. To me, a lot of that relates just to sharing your photos. But the point being is that you're able to synchronize some of those images across a variety of devices. And there's so much you can do. Then you can send the photos from Lightroom on your mobile device to other applications on your mobile device to add all sorts of creative effects. And it's hours and hours of fun. So a lot of what we've talked about so far has been related to getting organized with your photos. But of course, a big part of working with your photos is optimizing those images, getting those images to look their best. And I do encourage you to go far beyond just the basic set of adjustments when you're working with your photos. Very often, I think, I've found this even for myself sometimes. I'm kind of working quickly and trying to get through a project, and I go, oh, yep, there's okay, basic tone, basic color, we're good, let's move on. Then later I go and print that photo. Oh yeah, chromatic aberrations. Forgot about that checkbox. Should have turned that on. Noise reduction, lens corrections in general, perspective corrections, getting rid of vignetting on wide-angle lenses. So let me take this image, for example, back to color, and just scrolling down. The basics do a good job. The HSL adjustments, I can fine-tune individual colors in the photo. So if let's say, for example, that I don't like those greens and yellows too much, I can shift the hue, for example, for just the greens or just the yellows, or maybe I need a little more saturation for the green and yellow areas of the photo, or maybe I want to tone down the saturation of just those particular areas. So HSL, hue, saturation, and luminance, I can adjust the attributes, the hue, kind of like a color balance adjustment of sorts, the saturation or the intensity of colors, and the lightness or luminance of the colors, and I can apply those adjustments for individual ranges of color values. If I got a little magenta haze off in the distance, I can reduce the saturation for the magentas. If one of the colors came out looking a little odd, I can make an adjustment there. The sharpening, obviously, noise reduction can be super important, especially for long exposures, images captured at night where in the shadow areas you're likely to have a lot of noise. Images obviously captured at a high ISO setting. Images that were underexposed that you had to crank up a little bit. Basically, it's the same as increasing ISO. It's going to give you more noise. Lens correction. So here, for example, I've got profile corrections. I can remove chromatic aberrations in a somewhat automated way. And I can also apply a profile-based adjustment to the photos. So that based on the lens that was used, in this case, this is with a cropped sensor camera. And so it's with a 10 to 22 millimeter lens, what I call my chromatic aberration maker, which has a lot of chromatic aberrations to it. In this type of scene where we don't have any backlighting, it's usually not real high risk, but still might be some chromatic aberrations there. And definitely some distortion from that lens and some vignetting. So if I turn that checkbox off versus on, notice we're getting a little bit of that barrel versus pin cushion distortion correction, so kind of straightening things out a little bit, getting a very significant brightening of the edges to compensate for the rather significant vignetting of this particular lens. So some easy adjustments that I can apply relatively quickly. Dehaze, do I have any hazy shots here? Not really. But the dehaze adjustment can be wonderful for reducing the appearance of haze in an image. I'm sure I have some in here somewhere. But again, the point is not which specific adjustments you need to think about all the time, but rather to be thoughtful to remember that there's lots of other adjustments in there. Get beyond the basics and really try to think about the image, focus on the image, scrutinize the image, and when you think you're finished, maybe zoom in, maybe take a step back, try and think of what other things, is there anything at all that you could do to make that image look even better? And if you take that approach to optimizing, okay, I think I'm finished. Wait, hold on. Maybe there's one more. What else could I possibly do to make this image a little better? What, in my fantasy world, what would make this image better if I could possibly do that? Well, maybe a rainbow in the background, or a hot air balloon floating over the house. No, but whatever I can possibly think of to improve the image, when I run out of ideas, then I might be finished. And then I can think about, okay, did I get it up to like a 4 or 5 star rated image, or is it still a 3? So try to really be thoughtful. I find that very often photographers don't spend enough time considering what other optimization adjustments, corrective adjustments they might want to apply to the image. They forget to check for dust spots, for example, so then they make a nice big print and you see these dust spots. Back in the old days of photography, remember film? How many times would I see when we were transitioning from film to digital, I would see images with a little tiny black edge along the edge of the print, the edge of the photo itself, because they scanned a slide and didn't crop out the slide mount altogether, for example. So try to really scrutinize the image. It can make a big, big difference in terms of the ultimate quality of the image itself. Synchronized adjustments, not always, but here's a real handy time saver for situations where you have images that were captured under similar circumstances, similar lighting, etc. And so, for example, if we switch into the develop module here, this is an image that I have applied some adjustments to, and then there's some images captured at the same basic location with the same basic lighting condition and the same basic exposure settings, aka a little bit too dark. But I can take the adjustments that I applied to this image and synchronize them with other images captured under the same basic conditions. So in the develop module, I could enable auto sync. So if I flip this little light switch of sorts up, then I'm in auto sync mode. So while I'm working, the changes will apply to multiple images. I don't tend to do that because I tend to forget that I want to apply the adjustments to multiple images until after I've already applied those adjustments to one image. But sometimes, I'll work on an image and I say, oh, wait, I like this other one better. Whatever the case might be, I can select those multiple images. If I turn on auto sync, then as I apply the adjustments, they'll change in real time for all of the selected images. But if I did not turn on auto sync, once I've selected all of the images with the image that I've applied my adjustments to as the active image, the image that I'm looking at in my large preview there, then I can click the sync button down at the bottom of the right panel in the develop module. I can even pick and choose which particular options I want to synchronize. For example, maybe sometimes I don't want to synchronize the cropping for the image. I crop this image, but I don't necessarily want to crop the other images. Whatever the case might be. Think about dust spots. Hypothetically speaking, if I ever were to have any dust spots at all on my image sensor, hypothetically, the thing about dust spots on the sensor is they show up in the exact same spot for every single picture. You can synchronize those adjustments essentially to clean up multiple images. So at the moment I have everything turned on. Again, I could disable certain of these if I don't want to synchronize absolutely everything. But then, if you watch those thumbnails down below, boom, they update as well once I choose the option to synchronize, and now I've applied the exact same adjustments to all of those selected images. Keep in mind, that's a nice shortcut, but I don't necessarily want precisely the same adjustment for every single image. Well, I captured them all at the same time with the same exposure settings, so probably the adjustments are absolutely perfect for every single one. Except during one of those shots, a cloud moved in front of the sun, so it actually was, even darker. Whatever the case might be, go back and review each image individually to make sure that you're happy with the result, that you don't need to perform a little bit of fine tuning. And in my mind, almost just automatically go and fine tune the adjustments anyway, just to try to make sure that the image looks its absolute best. All right, round trip to Photoshop. So I mentioned this as one of the examples. Everything starts inside of Lightroom. Everything. We don't go to Photoshop and open up an image directly. Obviously, for an increasing number of photographers, Lightroom is becoming all they need for adjusting their photos, but every now and then. So for example, we have the content-aware technology inside of Photoshop that can be very helpful for image cleanup. That's not available in Lightroom, at least not yet, hopefully at some point soon. Being able to apply targeted adjustments. Yes, you can do that in Lightroom, but it's a heck of a lot more powerful inside of Photoshop with the ability to create selections, etc. So I find that more and more photographers don't really need to send their photos from Lightroom to Photoshop, but when you do, it can be just absolutely amazing. So let's just assume I want to do some work with this image. I don't have any images with dust spots, otherwise I would use that as, as an example. Thank you for humoring me. So I've got an image that I want to send over to Photoshop. I can just go to the Photo menu and choose Edit In, followed by Edit in Adobe Photoshop. So easy. Then I send that photo over to Photoshop. I don't have to make any decisions. Photoshop launches for me automatically. It's so simple, so easy, so amazing. Hard to believe that something so amazing can happen so quickly. And then I decide I want to apply some sort of adjustment to the image. Maybe it's a targeted adjustment, whatever the case might be. For our purposes, let's make the image look absolutely silly, mostly because I just want to have something that's very obvious so that we can see what we've accomplished. Wow, that's interesting. It's funny, I'll use this as a joke sometimes, and people laugh, ha, 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 nobody would ever do that to their image. But then I'll also get that, wait, how'd you do that? I want to apply that. Yeah, it's just a pencil tool and curves and just make a big zigzaggy sawtooth pattern on the curve, and it's fun. All right, but when I'm finished, so there are a couple key things about this workflow. It seems so easy, but you don't want to make a silly mistake. When you're finished doing whatever it is that you need to do in Photoshop, so we've sent the image from Lightroom to Photoshop, easy breezy. I do whatever, I can take advantage of every single feature in Photoshop if I want to. When I'm finished, very important, File, Save, period. Not Save As, Save. File, Save. So I can go to the File menu and choose Save. Yes, of course, there's a keyboard shortcut for that as well. Not Save As. But Tim, I need to tell Lightroom, tell Photoshop where to save this file. No, you don't. But I need to give it a file name. No, you don't. But I need to tell it that I want it to be a Photoshop PSD file or a TIFF file. No, you don't. But no. File, Save, not Save As. You don't want to confuse Lightroom. Lightroom already told Photoshop where to save it and what to call it. And as you might recall from earlier today, there's some preferences that relate to that. What kind of file do you want to create? You can even choose the naming structure. By default, it just adds the word edit to the file name, for example. Photoshop already knows where to save it. Don't confuse anybody. Don't confuse Lightroom, because again, when Lightroom's confused, you're confused, and that's no good. So just file save, that's it. Then file close. Save and close. Easy. And by doing that, when you get back into Lightroom, you've got your image in all its psychedelic glory. It's there inside of Lightroom, right next to the original, by default in a stack with the original. Then you decide, I just thought of one thing that could make this even better. I know what you're thinking. How could this image possibly get any better? But I thought of something. I haven't yet, but I'm going to make something up in a second. I want to send this photo back to Photoshop. Minor additional point of possible confusion. It's the same basic process. I go to the photo menu, edit in, and edit in Photoshop. However, this time it's not a raw capture. So Lightroom doesn't really know what to do with it. Do I want to just make a copy with my Lightroom adjustments? Do I want to make a copy without my Lightroom adjustments? Or do I want to edit the original? Well, I don't want another copy. I want to get back to my image with my layers, most importantly. So I definitely don't want a copy, because then it won't have the layers, the valuable layers that I added in Photoshop that I want to get back to and fine tune. So while I wish it was not called Edit Original, I need Edit Original. And by original, it means the original version of this derivative copy that was based on the actual original capture. So it's not the original, but we still call it original. Did I get that right? I don't know. Yeah, it's a little bit of confusing terminology, because to me the original is the original raw capture. And Lightroom knows which file is the original raw capture for this image. They're in a stack together, but it's not offering to edit my original raw capture. It's offering to edit this actual file that I clicked on, which happens to be a Photoshop PSD file, Photoshop document. See, the thing is, I criticize that edit original is not the best terminology here. I've still not yet thought of what I think it should be labeled. If anybody's got any ideas, let me know, and then I'll tell Adobe, claim it was my idea. So, yeah, well, because sometimes you are editing the original. It could be a raw, I don't know. In any event, we choose the Edit Original option because that's the only way that we can get this file with all of its layers intact back into Photoshop, so that I can take this nearly perfect image and make it even better. With, like, the only thing I can think of that would make it a little bit better is if it was a gradient effect. That's much better. So this is what happens when they let just anybody do a live streaming event at B&H Photo. All right, so whatever it is that I want to do, obviously I'm just making stuff up as I go along here, but I apply this effect, and then once again, file save, file close, file save, not save as, and then file close. And then as if by magic, the updated version. I only wish now that I had enabled this image to be synchronized to Lightroom Mobile so that I could then take you to my iPhone again and show you that it's synchronized there as well, because that would be extra bonus cool. All right. Back up the catalog. So I touched on this very briefly. There's a real important reason that I think backing up the catalog is helpful. Even though, theoretically, I don't need my catalog. I mean, I need my catalog desperately, but if I lost my catalog in Lightroom, I could just re-import my photos into a new catalog, and the vast majority of the information that I care about is going to be there, so I'm not going to have too much stress. Got all my keywords and my star ratings and even my develop adjustments still with those images. So you might say, well, who needs to back up the catalog then? Yeah, but I'm paranoid too, so I still want to back up everything multiple times. But also, I personally use Time Machine on my Mac to back up my internal hard drive. And I do that on a regular basis so that I have a backup of my catalog via Time Machine. So why do I need another backup of my Lightroom catalog? Paranoia for one thing, but also because when you back up your catalog in Lightroom, it gives you a couple of additional options. And that includes checking the integrity of your catalog and also optimizing your catalog, which can help improve overall performance in Lightroom. And so I still back up my catalog on a regular basis so that I can take advantage of those additional benefits. They're turned on by default, so basically just perform a backup, and you've taken those additional steps to make sure, hopefully, that your catalog still has good integrity so that you're not going to lose your catalog anytime soon, and also, perhaps more importantly, to optimize that catalog. Also, hopefully this goes without saying. Well, actually, if it went without saying, then this feature wouldn't operate the way it operates. By default, Lightroom tries to put the backup of your catalog in the folder with your catalog. So if your only catalog backup is the Lightroom catalog backup, they're both sitting in the same place. So if you leave your laptop on an airplane, I've never done that, only an iPad, or if your hard drive fails or something goes horribly wrong, you've now lost all backup copies of your catalog all in one fell swoop. That's efficient, but unpleasant. And so when you're backing up your catalog, so I'll go ahead and choose the option here to back up when Lightroom next exits. Handy little feature to know about. I'm set in my catalog settings dialog to back up my catalog once a week when I quit Lightroom. So in another week, it'll say, hey, it's time to back it up again. Great, let's make a backup. Also, if I decide, boy, I've been doing a lot of work today, so I want to back up my catalog right now, I can leave the option set essentially to weekly. But by choosing when Lightroom next exits, when I then quit Lightroom, I'll be prompted to back up my catalog. But the setting in catalog settings is still going to be set to weekly. So it's just a little one-time override. So back up the catalog, and I can choose test integrity before backing up. Why not? Seems like a really good idea. And optimize the catalog after backing up so that it makes a backup of your catalog in case anything goes wrong during that optimization process, and then it will analyze that catalog and optimize that catalog, which can really improve performance. Weekly, certainly a little bit of overkill, I would say, for optimizing, unless you're really active in your Lightroom catalog, but I'd rather do it too much than not enough, and it does improve performance. All right, so I'm going to skip that until next week, especially since this isn't my real catalog. Back up your photos. Nope. Lightroom's catalog backup does not back up your photos. It only backs up your catalog. Makes sense that they called it catalog backup, I guess. So backing up the catalog is only the catalog. It's only the information about your photos, not the photos themselves. And so make sure that you're also backing up your photos. So when I'm importing my photos into Lightroom, I'm actually creating a backup copy in real time. Unfortunately, it doesn't use the same folder structure that I use for my real source, so that becomes for me just kind of an extra backup. What I use is a synchronization approach, essentially, where I'm using a piece of software called GoodSync to synchronize from one hard drive to the next. So I back up to I download all my photos to my Photos drive, and then when that process is finished, then I synchronize my Photos drive to my Photos backup drive. And before I go on a trip, I back up, I synchronize from my Photos drive to my leave this copy at home as an extra backup Photos drive, because I'm paranoid. And so I synchronize across one drive to the next in order to make sure that I've got an exact copy. Now there is a little bit of a caveat here, potentially, in that synchronization generally means, depending on your software settings, that if you delete a photo on one hard drive, that's also getting synchronized. Now, GoodSync has an option where it can hold on to those deleted copies on the backup for a period of time. The default, I believe, is 30 days, for example. So there's some other ways to work around that. I don't tend to delete photos, so for me it doesn't tend to be a problem in any event. But my feeling, personally, is I want my backup to be an exact copy of the original, and one that therefore can just slide right into place of the original if something goes wrong. When my hard drive fails, no big deal, because I've got a synchronized backup that looks exactly like the Photos drive, so I basically can just plug it in place of the failed drive, and continue working. And run to B&H and buy another hard drive to replace and make another backup, because now I've only got 2 backups. But the point is that with that synchronization, the workflow, should something go wrong, is pretty straightforward. The backup is essentially exactly the same as the original that you're backing up. Make time for cleanup. You know your catalog needs cleanup, right? Anybody have a perfectly pristine catalog? You haven't started using Lightroom yet? You think your catalog's perfect?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Do you think that's a true statement? Maybe. So if I ask him if his catalog's perfect, he was quick to say yes, but if I asked if that was true, he paused there for a moment. So probably there's something. And it's kind of like that image optimization topic. You know, take a look. There's probably something else I could do to make that image even better. So I quit Lightroom to show you the backups. We'll launch Lightroom here again. But there's, okay, so maybe with this photo, there's nothing else we could possibly do to make it even better, right? But maybe I'll spend a minute thinking about it anyway. You know, oh, maybe the gradient should be a little larger. But there's probably something that could be done to improve your workflow, to improve your catalog, to improve your organization. Are there folders that should be maybe consolidated? Are there, you know, multiple days from a single trip, and really they should all just be in one folder? Are there photos that should be bifurcated, that should be split into 2 folders? Maybe you went on a trip that took you to multiple destinations. So for example, this was Austria. This is the Austria folder, and I've got this Italy folder. That was the same trip. But in my mind, because they're 2 different places with 2 different experiences, and so I put them into separate folders, just because that's the way I'm thinking about my own pictures. And I think that's the first thing to think about. How do you think about your pictures? And therefore, what might your folder structure look like, or your overall organizational workflow? What will that look like? When someone says, hey, Tim, do you have any good photos of windows? Then I might think, oh yeah, Bologna. You know, it's from the Italy trip. So let's go to the Italy folder and find those pictures, hopefully. Or you got any good running water, glacial preferably, so you get that nice green color in the water. Yes, in fact, in Austria, I got some of those with a wonderful psychedelic effect created with curves. You got to see it. So, you know, how I think about my pictures, when you say, have you ever photographed, you know, birds? Have you ever photographed, you know, zebras? What? More often than not, not always, but more often than not, if you ask about a particular subject, I can tell you the folder to go look in to find that subject. It doesn't always work, but most of the time it works pretty well. And so for me personally, I want to think a lot about that folder structure, and it's going to be based just on how I think about my folders, how I think about my photos. And so for example, if you take a look at my folder structure here for this sample catalog, it is not a good folder structure, even for me. For example, when you, oh, Tim, do you have any good pictures of windows, maybe with some green shutters perhaps? Why, yes, I do, from Bologna. That's in my Italy folder, where I'll go over on my folders list and scroll down until I find the eyes, as in Italy, except it's not there, because this one's called Road Trip in Italy, instead of just Italy. Road Trip could be a valid name. So for example, I took a road trip across the country from the Seattle area to New York when I first moved to New York. I chose to do it in the wintertime. That's why I'm teaching Lightroom, not teaching, you know, road trip planning. But for me, location per se is not exactly what I think of. To me, it's cross-country road trip. Literally, that's what I think of, and so therefore it is called cross-country road trip. Could have just been called road trip. Could have been called Seattle to New York. Could have been called a number of things, but I get to choose because I'm the one who has to try and think of the name later. So I am going to rename, not in my operating system, because we already know that everything has to be initiated inside of Lightroom because we were paying attention at the beginning of the presentation. But if I right-click, I can choose, for example, rename. And in this case, very simple, I can just get rid of the road trip in part and call it Italy 2016. What if I want to include the month? So this would have been September 2016. Italy, September 2016, except for one problem. Whoever came up with all the names of the months didn't name them in alphabetical order. So if I have trips from different months of maybe different years, now they're going to be in alphabetical order, which isn't necessarily so logical. I'd rather them be in essentially date order. So if I want to include the month, I need to use the number rather than the name. And I want to put the month after the year, not before the year, because I want to sort by year, then month, then day, if you get that detail oriented, but I don't. So I can include the month there as well. Again, the point is not that you need to put the month and the year. You don't necessarily even need the year at all. If it's a location, yes, you do. If it's a location that you've only been to once, then maybe it's just your trip to that place and the year becomes, in theory at least, a little irrelevant. Because keep in mind, you can go to the images themselves, look at the metadata, and see the capture time to figure out the year. But again, it's up to you what information you want to have readily available for your photos. The point is, the folders are listed alphabetically, so I want the names to be meaningful, and especially I want the first word to be meaningful in terms of how I think about my images. And then, in this case also, adding the date, including the date. So here's 2012 Croatia. Really, that should be Croatia 2012, for example, etc. So here was another example, Palouse June. That should not be Palouse June. If I want June, which is almost irrelevant for me because June is prime time in the Palouse, and so if I'm in the Palouse, it's probably in June anyway. But if I'm going to include the month again, include it at the end of that file name after the year. Again, just some basic examples to give you a sense of some of the review you might want to do. Going back into your catalog, there's probably something that you can accomplish. Most of the time, for most photographers, it probably relates to that folder structure. Maybe you've got multiple catalogs and you want to merge them. There's a wide variety of things that you might want to do with your images. And every now and then, revisit your workflow. So I told you about this approach that I use with star ratings, where instead of 1 star representing a bad image, 1 star just means it's a keeper. And 2 and 3 means, those are my good images from that trip, and 4 and 5 means these are the best images of all time, once I get some of those. That's not the workflow I was always using. A long time ago, I actually used color labels to mark my favorites. I'd use a red color label to identify my favorite images. And then I realized it didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. So I went to star ratings, and 1 equaled bad and 5 equaled great. And then I realized later, actually, there's no sense assigning a star rating that means this is bad. The image that doesn't have a star at all, those are the ones that I don't think I'm necessarily going to use. They're my outtakes. So I've revised my approach to organizing my images over time as well. And so I encourage you to kind of revisit your workflow. Think about the things that might be able to be made a little bit more efficient or more thoughtful, more organized. Look at your folder structures. There's some things we can clean up there. Think about how much time you're spending on different activities. Gee, I've never added a keyword in my life, and now I'm never able to find any of my photos. So maybe you want to start using some keywords. And when it comes to changing your workflow, you probably want to go back and change other things. So for example, if I was using color labels and I switched to star ratings, or maybe you're using pick flags in Lightroom and you switch to using star ratings, fine, then every single image with a pick flag you can add a star rating to. And then you can get rid of the pick flag if you so choose. So you can kind of go back and perform some of that cleanup work as you change your workflow, but it doesn't have to be all at the same time. If you used to use a date-based folder structure, the kind where you can never find your images unless you have like some incredible memory for dates. How many here actually use a date-based folder structure and feel that it works perfectly great for them? There are 4 of you. Then combined from the millions and millions of people who are probably streaming this live right now, there's probably an extra 7 of them. So we'll call it like 11 or 12. Let's call it an even dozen people for whom that works. And for the rest, for all the other millions of people who are watching this live streaming online, plus the thousands in this live studio audience, give or take, that's like 12 to probably hundreds of millions. If you decide that the date structure was a bad idea in the first place and you want to use an approach like I recommend, like I prefer personally, where the folder name is based on how you think about your images, Don't feel that you need to go back and have one marathon session to rename every single folder and consolidate images and do all that work. It doesn't have to be done all at once. From now, moving forward, when you import photos, use your new strategy for organizing your images. And then, as time allows, just go back and work, one folder at a time, rename those images, or the folders rather, consolidate folders as needed, split things up as needed, so that you just kind of, a little bit here and there, it's not an overwhelming task, you just kind of keep plugging away until that catalog is perfect. And by the time your catalog is perfect, you probably found some other mistake you made along the way, and you can go clean that up too. But do revisit your workflow from time to time. It's one of those funny things, when photographers are first getting started with Lightroom, I tell them, find a teacher, one teacher, and don't listen to anybody else. Make sure it's somebody whose style you like. Make sure that they're ideally doing a similar genre of photography. So for example, if you're a wedding photographer and you want to learn Lightroom, I wouldn't suggest that I'm the first person that you should go talk to about organization, because I'm not a wedding photographer, so I don't really have that nuanced sense of what issues workflow-wise you might face. So find one person, somebody that you feel comfortable with that can teach you everything you need to know about Lightroom. Then, once you know everything you need to know about Lightroom, now go listen to other people. And you might find some good ideas, some good nuggets here and there, ways that you can streamline or fine-tune your workflow that'll make your task that much better. But early on, I don't want you to have any confusion from multiple voices. Go find somebody whose style and whose workflow works for you, and learn to really understand how Lightroom works. Get your workflow figured out. And then once you're comfortable with Lightroom, then you can start to think about some other options. But regardless, keep on learning. Keep learning more about Lightroom, more about photography, more about anything, everything, more about the subjects that you're photographing. But if you just have a passion for understanding as much as you possibly can, so that you're able then to enjoy your photography that much more, you're able to be that much more organized, and more importantly, you're not going to have a mess in your Lightroom catalog, and hopefully then you'll always be able to find every single photo you need exactly when you need it. So thank you all very, very much for joining me today.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.